Hey everyone, this is Psychedelic Advocacy, and this video will be about psychedelic mushrooms. I'm just going to get right into it, and I'm going to start off sharing my experience with it. Actually, this experience is rather recent, so it's pretty fresh. I took psilocin, which is, I'll get into this later with the pharmacology, but basically, psilocybin is metabolized into psilocin in your body. So I just took psilocin, and I took basically the equivalent of about an eighth of dried mushrooms, an eighth of dried psilocybe cubensis, which is the most commonly used type of psilocybin-containing mushrooms. So I took this 25 milligrams of psilocin. I made sure all my screens were off. I was in a dark room with my eyes closed. I had calm music playing. It was nighttime. And I proceeded to have one of the most transcendent experiences. It started off, and I was seeing organic geometric patterns with my eyes closed. And as it reached this peak experience where all these geometric patterns were just flowing through my field of vision with my eyes closed, just beautiful geometric patterns, different colors, all this, it started to converge into a singularity in the middle of my vision. And it started to basically emulate this light coming from it, and it was so bright. The only way that I could describe it to someone is it's like staring at the sun. It was too much for me to handle. So I looked away with my eyes closed. I turned my head, and when I turned my head, all of a sudden this female hand appeared and turned my head back to look at this point of light. And the way this hand turned my head, it wasn't like a abrasive turning of the head. It was almost as if like how a mother might turn her child's head just to look at her. And that's what I did. And I noticed this hand that's completely made of light and geometric patterns, and I could tell it was a female hand. And then when I look back, all of the geometric patterns had conversed into this geometric figure of light, and it was just this feminine goddess. It was Mother Earth. And she looked at me, and I looked at her, and I was just like shocked. She smiled, and then all of a sudden, she just disintegrated into all these organic branches and vines and roots. It was very earth-like, and it started going into my essence, started going into my body, and started just sucking out all this negative energy. It started sucking out all this stuff that I didn't serve me as a human. It just was negativity. But then it started to download love and wisdom and knowledge and all these beautiful things into me. And then it subsided, and the geometric pattern subsided, and it was about a 3-hour experience. Now, this is probably not a very common occurrence for people who, have taken mushrooms, because most people don't take the proper steps that you're supposed to do to have these types of experiences. I fasted before this. I had preparation. I took all the proper steps I described earlier. Most people, they're just at a party or something or chilling with their friends, and hey, do you want to take some mushrooms? Yeah, sure, I'll take some mushrooms. And they just take them, and then they're like, oh, that was kind of cool, but I was kind of anxious and stuff. I don't know. It seems kind of asinine to me that people can make these comments about how they don't work, how they don't treat depression, anxiety, all this stuff when they don't even use it correctly. So that's why I want to share my experience about it, because this is an experience that everybody can have. It is replicable. Anybody can have this happen to them if they use it correctly and take the proper steps. And that's where a guide or a shaman comes in, because they're someone who has traversed this area before. They know what to do, they know how to recreate it, and they can guide you through it. Now, I'm going to go down and break down the pharmacology section of this now. So basically, the reason that you have a psychedelic experience when you eat mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, is because it contains psilocybin. Now, the chemical name for psilocybin is 4-PO-DMT. The full name is 4-phosphorate NN-dimethyltryptamine. When you ingest this and you eat it in the mushrooms, and it's present in mushrooms at 1% of the total weight dried. So let's say you eat 3.5 grams, an eighth of dried mushrooms. You just consumed 35 milligrams of psilocybin. Now, psilocybin is metabolized by the liver. So once it reaches the liver, it is then converted into psilocin, which is what I took, because you can't take psilocin and skip psilocybin. Now, psilocin is for HO-DMT, 4-hydroxy N,N-dimethyltryptamine. Now, what people don't know is that actually psilocybin is a prodrug of psilocin, and there is other prodrugs of psilocin as well. And psilocin is structurally very, very similar to serotonin. It's also extremely similar to dimethyltryptamine. I mean, it's in the name, dimethyltryptamine. And in high doses, this is my opinion, high doses of psilocybin or high doses of psilocin are almost identical to orally active DMT. And then when you take psilocin in flood doses, other than taking it orally, it is almost an identical experience to when you flood your system with DMT that is not orally active. So this is a really interesting thing. And that's the basic breakdown of the pharmacology behind it. These substances are quite interesting if you do some research into it. And if you look at the history of psilocybin, you know that psilocybin has been used indigenously by numerous populations for thousands and thousands of years for spiritual purposes, for healing, and it's a great tool for healing. It's a problem solver. It's such a great tool. Now, the indigenous South Americans used it, the Central Americans, North Americans, Europeans, and Africans. So that's 5 out of 7 continents that have a long history using these mushrooms, and they're pretty common. Now, there is this one theory called the stoned ape theory, which I subscribe to. And basically, it states that primitive hominoids were hunter-gatherers, and what they did was they followed packs of animals across the savannas in Africa. And one way to track these animals was looking for scat. Now, psilocybin mushrooms exclusively grow out of animal excrements, out of poop. And they can grow in other ways, but this is the main way that they are grown. And it's very interesting. So imagine you're a primitive hominoid tracking down this group of animals, and you come across these mushrooms growing out of the scat that you're tracking. You're hungry. What are you going to do? You're going to eat it. And they eat it, and then they have this explosion. We know that psilocybin actually creates new neural pathways. It creates neuroregenesis. It creates more brain activity. And these primitive humans that would have had this experience would have developed empathy, which is a leadership quality. It would have been seeing intense geometric fractals. It would have started to spur imagination and thought. And this wasn't an isolated event. This was something that happened millions and millions and millions of times over millions and millions of years, thus led to our evolution. If you look at the first artwork that we have ever discovered, it's of psychedelic experiences. Some would say that the effect was so profound that these psychedelics had on primitive humans that it created the first art. It was so profound, and they wanted a way to express it, and that's what cave art is. It's very, very interesting stuff. And psychedelic mushrooms are a great introduction to psychedelics. They're very navigable. It's about a 3 to 4 hour experience. The trick is to not use it incorrectly. Now, I'm going to go off here a little bit because some people are purists and they say the only reason you should use psychedelic mushrooms is, obviously for spiritual purposes or healing, but people use them socially, and this is about harm reduction, and people need to know how to use them correctly socially. And taking a psychedelic dose of mushrooms socially is not good. You're going to get anxious. It's going to be overwhelming. But what people don't know is there's a lot of indigenous cultures that use them socially as an entheogen to connect with other people. Now, you can take psilocybin in doses of about 1 to 2 grams depending on your tolerance, and you will not have the overwhelming psychedelic effect. Actually, the effect produced is more similar to MDMA or ecstasy. methylene dioxymethamphetamine. That is what the effects are more similar to. You'll have slight visuals, but overwhelmingly you'll just have this euphoria that makes you want to move and dance and connect with people. So using psychedelic mushrooms in the 1 to 2 gram range, that is the best method if you want to do this socially. I don't subscribe to that. I wouldn't do it personally, but it's much better if people know the correct dosaging to use in social situations than to go off and take 7 grams of mushrooms and freak out. There's so much to learn from psychedelic mushrooms. They are so profound, and for me, whenever I'm having an issue, whenever I'm having some problems that I can't really quite figure out on my own, I need a little help, I can go into a psychedelic experience with psilocybin mushrooms or with psilocin, and in that altered state, in my experience, I think about those issues, and we know that what psychedelics do is they connect all your neural pathways, parts of the brains that never communicate. It's physically impossible for these parts of the brain to communicate, but they do communicate under this influence of psychedelics. It's super interesting. So I process all my trauma. I process situations that baffle me, that I can't figure out. I gain so much knowledge and so much wisdom, and I gain empathy. It makes me a better person, and I don't understand why anybody would turn their nose to this experience. It makes me a much more empathetic. It makes me a better son. It makes me a better brother. It makes me a better human in general. And this is the truth of psychedelics. If you use it correctly, there is no limit to what you can accomplish, and it is so beneficial. There is just so much to learn from these compounds. That's all I got on psychedelic mushrooms. Thanks for tuning in. This is Psychedelic Advocacy.